The sea chewed the base of Dragonstone as if unhappy with the taste of basalt, waves working their monotonous anger against teeth of black rock. Mist lay thick enough to taste. Dawn was something imagined far away beyond the fog, a slender brightness that touched nothing. Gulls cried like gossiping children in unknown tongues, and the smell of wet stone and last night's fires did not clear even when the wind shifted its mood. Jon stood alone on the outer battlements, gloved fingers worrying the rim of the Merlin where old salt had crusted the stone white. He had not slept. He had given the night to footsteps, one foot in front of the other, turn the other foot, and to thoughts that paced with him. If he closed his eyes, he saw the red keep like a thorn held between finger and thumb, delicate and dangerous, and beyond it the pale wash of a city that did not belong to him, and a dragon's shadow crossing the roofs of 100,000 souls. Behind him Dragonstone breathed like a beast asleep. Timbers settled, gulls landed and rose again, men coughed in their throats. A door complained against hinges. Somewhere, so deep the sound felt like a tremor underfoot, the dragon stirred and let a note of furnace heat out into the morning. He had learned the beast sounds the way men learn a wife's footsteps, whether he'd wanted to or not. Drogon had a growl that meant contentment, and another for hunger, and a third, seldom heard, that made the skin along Jon's back contract as if frost had run his spine. An answer to a command, or the idea of one. He looked down past the crenellations to the causeway that cut its knife edge across the surf. Water foamed and twisted through gaps like torn cloth caught on a jag. He had first walked that bridge months ago under different skies, when the promise of what they could do together had glowed somewhere in his chest like a coal that did not burn out. They had shown each other caves where ancient men had tried to warn the world in chalk and charcoal and old blood. He had come to tell her the truth of what moved in the dark, and she had come to tell him of fire, and for a time he had believed those two truths would not cut each other to pieces. Bootsteps came and stopped behind him with the respectful space a man leaves to someone he would rather not startle by accident. "You'll catch a cough," Davos said, as if one could catch anyone ill in this castle and not all the rest. The voice was weathered wood and slow smoke from a long-banked fire. "We're near out of lemon, and the cook makes something awful when there's no lemon. It turns to fish soup that tastes only of salt." "I'm not hungry," Jon said. Even to his own ears he sounded as if the sea spoke through his throat. And I'm a young lord with all 10 fingers," Davos said dryly. He came to the parapet, his one hand rapping the stone. He looked outward with a sailor's habit of never turning his back to open water. "I've kept ships waiting in fog. You think if you hold still and quiet the sea will put its ear to your hull and listen, and send something honest. It never does." Jon had no answer made of words. He nodded once. "Word just came from the city," Davos said after a time. "From some friend of a friend who likes my coin better than the Queen's. They say Qyburns had new scorpions mounted on the walls. Nothing a man cannot imagine. More iron, more winding, more murderous. More." The word felt flat and senseless. "That's the game in King's Landing. More of whatever makes a man sleep worse. The Golden Company stands at the gates, neat and handsome. Lannister men hold the inner wards neat and handsome. Cersei still smiles, neat and handsome. He let the silence open and close around them like a lung. When I was young and stupid, there was always a quick thing in me. Sail here, cut there, knock the board and start a new game," Davos said. "A thing for a boy. Then I came to learn about men with better chessboards. They set them in nails to the table, so a man cannot tip them in anger. Our queen has a way she likes to play her pieces, and now she has fewer pieces than yesterday, and that way only grows stronger in her head. I've seen it. Men keep to the familiar when they've lost too much already." "Our queen," Jon said, the words fitting and false both. He had knelt. He had put loyalty into his mouth and swallowed it like grain whiskey, burning and strengthening. He had meant it then in the way a starving man means bread, and like that, it had made him ache. Davos squinted at him sidelong without turning his head. His beard blew sideways in a thin wind and settled. "I have a simple question, my lord. If you'll have a simple question at this hour, ask. What do we do when we're asked to be less than we are? I'll say my piece, though the last time I said it you did not thank me for it. You were raised by a man who did not know how to lie even when it would save him. He named it honor and wore it like a shirt in winter. I have never been fit to judge that man, nor you by him. But now I am asking." Davos' eyes were soft as old rope. "When she asks us to be less than we are, what do we do?" Jon watched a gull swoop within bowshot. It hung on air, white and comfortable, then turned its head and was gone into the fog. Memory came to him, not in pictures but in a weight he had carried up the steps to the wall, down them to Winterfell, across an open field with friends dying all around. "My father used to say the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword." Davos said. He was fond of the old sayings. From what I hear, he believed them. I wanted to. I still do. He felt the words fighting each other in his mouth. "What if I don't know what the sentence is? Then you know at least to walk slow before you swing." They stood like that until the fog thinned and light began to define the edges of things. The Crenel's hard teeth, the slick backs of the waves, the line of Sts in the small harbor where what was left of their ships rocked like tired men on their feet. Somewhere within the castle a bell sounded, thin and domestic, telling some kitchen hour. Davos put his stump on the stone beside his hand as if to keep the old joke even. "I will say another thing, and then I'll go and be about my business. Ser Jorah died in the snow for that girl. The Dothraki died with flame on their rocks. Regal fell out of the sky with arrows like a man caught in sleep. I do not know what oaths are owed to the dead, but the living will make account of them in their own ways." He let out a breath. "I've been in the presence of men who had made up their minds. A weight comes off them like frost melting. She has the look of a mind made up. It will not unmake itself." "I know," Jon said. Davos's hand touched his sleeve and fell away. "Best eat something." When the old night had gone, Jon remained until the damp had worked its way into bone. He had always liked the quiet of mornings, the faint sense of truce before the day chose a side. But here the quiet held no promise. It was only emptiness in which anything might happen next. He turned and took the inner stairs down, his footfalls ringing shallowly in the spiral like coins dropped and rolling. The air warmed as he descended, until the breath he let out no longer smoked. The corridors of Dragonstone pressed inward to a scale meant for giants, the walls vein dark and shining where old fire had eaten and cooled. Men went about their work with that peculiar care they adopted when the world could turn over beneath them without warning. Eyes glanced up and away. By the time he reached the painted table, the chamber had filled with a murmur like bees behind a wall. The great slab of wood lay beneath the dragon's rib cage of carved timbers, the continents lifted and smoothed by hundreds of hands. He had come once as a supplicant, talking of the dead and the wall of night that moved with them. Now he came as something else, and he hated that he could not name it. Tyrion stood with his knuckles on the stormlands as if holding them to keep the table from sliding away. He had the look of a man who had been awake for 3 days and had no plan yet for the 4th. His hair stuck up in puffs from where his hand had traveled through it, and a patchy beard like storm lichen shadowed his cheeks. He glanced up and tried to make his face pleasant. The attempt was like light through fog. "Lord Snow," Tyrion said. "Jon," Jon said out of reflex. "Jon." Tyrion's gaze flicked past him to the doorway and became attentive, quick. "Has she?" "No," Jon said. "Not yet," Tyrion murmured. He poured wine from a flagon and did not drink. "They've mounted scorpions everywhere they can. The walls, the towers, the very stones of the city if Qyburn can teach them to throw a bolt. I used to tell people I was clever," he added in a voice that carried little humor. "It was a moniker that bounced easily off my tongue. Now I keep tripping on it." "Were you wrong?" Jon asked. The question fell out and surprised him. "Entirely too often," Tyrion said. His mouth twitched. "She will make out of that exactly what suits her. I fear she has stopped hearing what does not suit her. I used to drink to drown voices. Now I find myself throwing goblets into the fire and the voices do not even blink." Jon stepped close. Ships ranged over the painted sea, little more than scratches and thoughts. King's Landing peeled upward from the table in shorelines and ridges, and the red keep pricked the eye even rendered in wood. Once he would have said that he saw it, and that would have meant the walls and gates. Now he saw other things, where people slept 3 to a bed because there was no bed left to be had for a lesser price than a life, where bakers rose in the dark and made a city's bread, the ward where he had carried a boy and watched him die, the soldiers who wanted only to live to the next cup of ale. He saw the bells without seeing them, as a rumor, as a way men told themselves there was still a pivot in the day where it could turn and they might end the evening with their skins still on them. "She won't stop," Tyrion said so softly that Jon barely heard. Her father prickled with wildfire under his nails and called it wisdom. "She thinks the smoke around her head is a crown. Say it is grief. Say it is destiny. Say it is the child of both. She will not stop." "You told me once you believed in her," Jon said. "I did." Tyrion looked at his small hand over the Stormlands as if his fingers might leave an impression. "I still believe in what the world may become free of men like Cersei. But if the price for that is to burn a city, then all my belief is only a very elaborate way of shouting for fire. If I had any gods left, I would pray for a better price." Davos entered quietly, slid to a place like a man accustomed to watching without being watched. There were others. Grey Worm stood at the far end of the table, his posture a blade left standing point down in the earth, a thing that had no thought to do but stand. His eyes were indecipherable. Unsullied flanked him. Linen, leather, spears like ink lines. 2 Dothraki lounged near a pillar with predator laziness, oil gleaming on their hair and the curved steel of their araks like moon pieces. Varys's absence was a thing that reflected light, like a mirror covered with a cloth. It could be there and yet leave the room changed simply by not being. After a time, the air grew hotter like breath held too long. Some men swallowed. Others pretended not to notice at all. When she entered, no one mistook the reason for the heat. The dragon followed its mother as if drawn by a chain, the sound of its weight thudding through the timbers of the roof. Its scent came with it, meat and iron and the coldness of old fire. Daenerys stepped beneath the dragon's ribs, as if beneath bones of a deity carved and hung there for worship. Rs to remember they were ants. She had fasted or forgotten food. Her face was a thin moon, eyes larger so that the pale violet of them claimed more of the whites. There was a stillness in her that did not look like calm. Her hair was braided, but more quickly and without the art Missandei had coaxed into it, and she wore a darker dress than her habit, as if a shadow had answered her body's shape. Grey Worm watched her with that absolute attention that did not ask or answer questions. Tyrion's mouth moved once and became a line. Jon felt the coils within his chest tighten, as if someone drew a bowstring through his ribs and notched it. "Sit," Daenerys said. She did not sit herself. Her voice was not loud, but it had the smoothness of a blade drawn out of a sheath. Men heard and obeyed without choosing to. They gathered themselves at the table, this assembly of histories braided into something that could no longer be unwound. Smuggler, dwarf, bastard, eunuch soldier, horse lords, sailors and script scratchers and boys who had learned to be men in the wrong season. Tyrion cleared his throat and said something of scorpions and walls and men and bells and things that might be done at this gate and that postern. It was all correct, Jon thought, and it all addressed the wrong question. He watched her watching the table like a prophet scans the ground for spoor. When Tyrion's plan ran down into a weary silence, she looked at him, and then at Jon. Her eyes were not mad. He had seen madness in eyes, and this was not that. It was worse, because what he saw there was a decision that had no room left in it for any other consideration. "They will not love me," she said. "And why should they? Their love is bought cheap with lies. I will free them. If they will not be free, I will burn the chains off their wrists. If they cannot hold the hammer, I will make them a new hand. That is mercy, not cruelty." Tyrion's throat worked once. "My queen." She did not cut him with a gesture. She did not need to. "You must not whisper in my ear any longer, Lord Tyrion. I have heard enough whispers. The only things that have ever been true in my life burned or bled." Grey Worm's chin lifted a measure in quiet assent. The Dothraki smiled small, feral, uncomprehending of walls and gates except as things to run down. Jon found that he had leaned forward without meaning to. His hands were on the table, pressing into the white-painted edges of the riverlands where summer had been imagined. "There are people," he said, and the sentence felt as useless as telling gray stones to be softer. "Women, boys, old men who have outlived their sons. They don't even know your name beyond the way it sounds in the market. They will speak my name differently when the world is changed," she said. There was no heat in it. It was only fact, offered like terms of surrender. She looked at him then in a way he had once mistaken for softness. "Bend without breaking, John. Stand with me. Be what you are and not what they say you are. If you will not be with me, you will be against me, and I do not want you against me." There it was, that softness that had nothing to do with mercy. He had seen it before and not understood. Now he understood, and the understanding hurt in his bones. He said nothing. She looked away as if the loss did not weigh a feather. "The bells mean nothing," she said quietly to the air and to the wood. "Let them ring until their ropes shred. Let them ring until the blacksmiths hammer their clappers into nails." She turned and walked from the chamber, and the dragon followed above her like a moving roof, and for a little while there was the smell and sound of her on the air as if she had burned a letter and the ink were dying. Men let out breath. Davos stood as if his knees had decided without him. Tyrion's hand trembled on the cup as he finally drank. Varys arrived in the doorway then, as if the castle had chosen a cruel joke for timing. The steady eyes, the patient hands, the subtle scent of whatever oil he used. He was as he always had been, and somehow that made him more dangerous. Tyrion looked at him with a tiredness like pity. "You are too quiet," he said, and in the words was the echo of 100 days when Varys had spoken instead of waiting. "Quiet spiders bite, don't they?" "Only when the palace burns," Varys said, and it was nothing at all and everything. His gaze moved to Jon and did not hold long. "May we have a word?" he said to Tyrion. "In the corridor. The walls here have ears that have grown too used to your voice." They left, and Davos followed after with the look of a man who intended to be where he could stop a knife if one decided to go walking on its own. Jon remained at the table and watched his hands as if they might tell him something. He thought of the boy he had been in Winterfell running under the weirwoods, his breath making little ghosts even in high summer, and of his father lifting the sword not as a threat but as a simple fulfillment of duty. He thought of Ygritte and the dark in the caves, the way a voice can echo and be mistaken for two voices, and of a pale hand clutching black gate iron. He thought of Sam in the library and Maester Aemon's blind eyes lifted toward voices and how the old man had said a thing like a physician telling a young man griefs he would wake to and sleep with for the rest of his life. Love has a way of killing duty. He had understood the line and lived to discover how the converse was a worse truth. For duty would not only kill love, it would keep walking afterward with its hands blood wet. When he finally pushed away from the table, he had no plan and he had something worse than a plan. The knowledge that he would have to do a thing not because it could be done or done well, but because it could not be left undone. He found Tyrion at the corridor's turn with Davos a pace off, both of them standing in the light that fell aslant between stones like a swirl. Dee left leaning. Varys had gone. Tyrion's mouth took the shape of words and let them fall away. "I told her," Tyrion said, "what he was doing. I told her because I told myself he would get too many people killed if he was allowed to do it." That's a pretty sentence. It hides its miserable heart like a prostitute's rouge. What I mean is, I told her because it is easier to push a man off a cliff than to hold him by the collar and be dragged toward the edge with him. I traded one set of deaths for another set. I do not know which are mine. "What is he doing?" Jon asked, though the answer already pricked his skin. "Writing letters," Davos said simply, his voice the sound of rope paying out over a capstan. "The kind that stand up without a signature and walk to 100 different doors. Names in ink are like hornets. A few are inconvenient. A swarm is a meal you will spend the rest of your life picking out of your teeth." "My name," Jon said, with the same flat tone he had used for the sea. "What I am." Tyrion's face pinched as if something in his gut had twisted without warning. "He thinks it will make a better world. No, he thinks it will make a world that will, after bleeding, call him wise. All men of state are poets after a fashion. They find a shape for their motives and call it the noblest word they can bear. "And what do you think?" Jon asked Davos. "I think to put a name in the mouth of the wrong person is to hand him a knife," Davos said. "I also think the world is not a stew you can unseason with a pinch of your fingers once a man has got to the spice cupboard." Jon closed his eyes. The castle breathed around him. In the distance, so far it sounded like a rumor of thunder. There came a voice like a furnace exhaling, and then another sound, higher and human, and then more of the same. A gathering, a summoning, a choice made and set in motion. "We need to go," Tyrion said, and the sick knowledge in his face told Jon the rest. They followed the sound out into the courtyard where men and women had arranged themselves with that particular mixture of awe and curiosity that attaches itself to the day's news when the news is meat and noise and fire. Drogon's head was a huge scythe over the stepped pavement. The air moved like heat in a bellows. Varys stood with hands folded as if at a small court. His eyes were dry. They always had been. He looked neither brave nor craven. He looked like a man who had decided on a thing and followed its steps to the last one. Daenerys stood at a remove, the dragon between her and the world, as if to spare her the ugliness, or to mask her from it. The words that passed between them slid off the air like water off oil. Jon heard nothing of them but saw the shape of them in Varys's face, the slight movement of Daenerys' mouth. Something in the pits of today's men knew it before the act. A moving of weight from one foot to the other, the softening of knees. "Dr," a word, and the rest of it, fire. The courtyard was alight with it, as if the sun had stooped and kissed the stones. Varys burned without calling for water or mother or gods. He burned like a thing long ago promised to flame and now fulfilling its nature. The smell of him was a thing Jon could not uncouple from other smells he had known. Tallow and hair and something like roasted chestnut. He would taste it in his throat for days. When it was done, the fire did not linger. It was drawn back into the beast that had given it. A breath reversed. There were sounds afterward. Shuffling, the faint clink of spearheads knocking helms. A woman's abortive sob that she swallowed at once like a pebble. Tyrion's hand finding and missing his cup far away a second time. Jon had not moved. He had watched and found within himself a cold he had not wanted to find there. He had killed men. He had killed men who did not deserve killing and watched boys die who would have done good if they had lived. He had killed a woman in a courtyard with a rope because she had called herself a wildling and a mother of men, and because, once, she had loosened her arrows into his friends. He had killed his love with a blade in the dark because there had been nothing else he could do that would not unmake him. He had never watched someone who had chosen to be his friend burn at a word, and discovered that all his experience did not teach him what to do with the feeling. Daenerys turned away before the last red light had gone out of the ash. Grey Worm's face was a carved oath. The Dothraki were smiling slightly, not at the burning, perhaps, but at the spectacle of it, loving power as men love a clever horse. The courtyard rearranged itself into lesser duties. Life had a stubborn way of insisting it wanted to continue. Men went to carry water and sharpen tools and speak the orders that would carry them toward the next thing. Jon stood with Davos at his side and Tyrion somewhere in his gravity. The three of them were an island inside the castle inside the morning. "She will burn the city," Tyrion said without emotion. "Today, tomorrow, in a week. When the day comes, she will not remember that she once intended anything else. She will not want to remember. She will burn the city," Davos repeated in a different voice. "That's the bit I prefer to keep my eye on." "We can't stop her with words," Jon said. "We've tried. You've tried." "Ah," Tyrion said. He looked at Jon's face the way a man looks toward a wind that is about to change. "There is an old house in King's Landing, one of a dozen too old to remember its own founding. Men used to draw lots there to decide who would swing the sword for this or that offense. There are names for all those things. This was a carefully attended bit of business. The man who drew the black straw would carry the thing out and not be named a murderer by any. It was good for their sleep. Men are tender that way about words. Keep in mind, Jon. What you are thinking may demand a neat word to live in." Jon looked past Tyrion to the parapet where a single unsullied stood as still as the stone that held him up. He saw Grey Worm going away with long strides, the weight of sadness laid over his shoulders like a soldier's pack. He saw the dragon turn its head to follow Daenerys, like a child following a mother who has already forgotten the child is behind her. He saw nothing at all that did not require him to move. Davos, he said, can you find me a place where the stones will not talk? I know every place in this castle where a man goes to do a thing he doesn't want to carry on his tongue, Davos said. His voice was clean of surprise now. I do. You'll want a word with her in a place where fire cannot take you all at once. Jon nodded once. Tyrion, I need to ask you. Tyrion shook his head, weary, and something in his eyes made Jon stop. No, do not ask me. The better part of me has already died a dozen times in the service of a poor idea. I do not have another to spare. I wasn't asking you to. I know, Tyrion said. They stood a few heartbeats in the corridor with their breath making a small cloud of damp in the cool air. If you are going to do the thing I think you are going to do, it must be done in a way that does not break everything. It will break enough as it is. He glanced away and back. She will have guards everywhere her shadow falls. A queen who has just burned her spymaster is like a cat with blood on its whiskers. The mouse hole looks a likely place for monsters. I don't want to trick her, Jon said. I won't. The words surprised him with their steadiness. He felt as if he were standing where the tide pulled out too fast and the sand made a strange sound underfoot as all the tiny shells shifted. You only want, Tyrion began, and then stopped. Yes, I see. He let that faint bitter smile drift across his mouth again. You have always been these contradictions in boots. If a god wanted to teach the rest of us how impossible decisions are made, he would have made one man like you and then set him in front of all our troubles. Davos made a small sound that could mean approval or caution or both. There's a cave, he said, down where they took the dragonglass once. You know it. His eyes held a quiet like a chapel before prayers. I'll tell the sentries they saw you go out. That will be true enough. I can't keep all the castle from knowing where you are. I don't want them to know, Jon said. He felt suddenly absurd for saying it, as if wishing the tide to stop would keep his feet dry. It's a big castle, Davos said. People lose their own memories in it. Never mind their friends. He pulled in his mouth, thinking, there's another thing. You won't get her there if she does not choose to go. And she won't choose it unless she thinks the choice is hers. You cannot command her to speak to you like one of your lieutenants. You know this. I know. She looked at you just now as a woman looks at a door she once loved to open and now doesn't even want to touch. If there's a handle there still, you'd best find it. Jon went out into the fog again and stood until he could be certain of his footsteps. He found the path that cut down the flank of the island, an old goat's way that stank of damp and seaweed and led to a place where the cliffs made two walls and the ocean pushed up a cold tongue to lick at whatever it could reach. The cave where he had shown her lines on stone waited like a throat. Even in daylight it held onto its dark. The air was like the inside of a mouth. Warm, wet, and oddly intimate. He stood a long while with his hand on the wall, the ridges of old carvings pressing back. He did not pray. He did not know how, and the old words had always felt like cutting strips of paper and throwing them in the wind to see where they stuck. He did not ask anything. He waited for the idea to stop trying to flee his mind when he looked at it too directly. When he came back up into the court, she stood already moving across the stones toward the stair that would send her to her chamber. Her guards were in that stance men adopt when they do not know whether they are needed. Grey Worm was not there. The Unsullied were there as formations, not as persons. The dragon was a shadow above them, red tongue showing once between teeth wider than a man's chest. Your Grace, Jon said, and the title sounded correct and wrong like a prayer for a man in the wrong temple. She turned. She had always moved with something of a cat's economy, as if space would always arrange itself to flatter her. Now that elegance had a new edge, to save wasted strength. Jon, she said, and his name in her mouth was a sound he could not be content with or escape. I asked you before to speak somewhere there are no ears, he said. I ask again. She studied him. She could do that without seeming to. He felt the weight of it all the same. I have little to say that is not for the world, she said. But if you ask, it will be the last time. He let out breath he had not known he was holding. There's a place, he said. You know it. She dismissed her closest guards with the flick of a finger, the way a noblewoman dismisses servants. A few trailed at distance. It would not be possible to cut her entirely from her web. The dragon lifted its head and followed like hunger. They walked along the passage that gave out onto the cliff path. The wind did not rise. It held itself in a polite pause as if reluctant to play a part in this conversation. When they came to the stair cut into the rock, she did not hesitate. She walked down with a surety that made him remember for a second time that she had been forged by exile and hunger and men who had wanted to touch and control her and found their fingers burned off. Inside the cave, the light settled on their faces and then sank away. On the wall, the old white lines caught something of what little sun there was and clung to it. The air smelt of salt and fresh earth, a smell like the ground beneath snow. The heat of the dragon did not enter. Drogon stayed outside, indolent as a cat in a door shadow, his presence a pressure on the world. "Here," she said, and it was almost a question. "You said once there were things older than kings," he said. "I believed you because I knew it already without knowing it. The thing that is older than kings changes men. You have let it change you, and I have let mine change me. And now we stand underneath it like two trees in a wind from different corners of the earth." She tilted her head. "Poetry, John. I would not have expected it." "What do you plan to make of the city?" he asked. He had promised himself he would not ask again. He could not help the question. It came out of him like the sound a wounded animal makes even without knowing it will help nothing. She did not look away. "I intend to hurt it so it cannot hurt me," she said. "I intend to burn away everything in it that would keep the people in their small circles. I intend to make fear useful and then set it aside when it has brought me to the place where I can be what I was made to be. If you burn the children," he said, and his throat closed as if he tried to swallow something with edges, "you will not set anything aside after. You will be the fire you used. It will live where you live. You will carry it." "I have always carried fire," she said in a voice that grew a little softer. "You of all men should understand that." "I do," he said. "Ido. That's why I came." He moved toward her and saw the way her shoulders let down a fraction. She thought he would touch her. Once he would have. His heart hurt then for both of them, as if a man were tightening a strap around it to prepare him for some medicine that would hurt worse. He did not touch her. He put 2 steps of air between them and made his voice steady. "I have to ask you not to. I have to ask you to be better than any of this. You can be. I have seen it. And if I do not," she said, "what will you do then?" He had thought he would choose some words to make it easier. They dissolved on contact with the shape of her face, the line of her mouth, the way a lamp might go out if someone opened a door and let in too much air. The only words that remained were the simple ones. "I cannot let you. If there was any other way, I would take it. There is not." He expected anger. She did not grow angry. She looked at him with an expression that was more terrible to see because it was almost tender. It was the look a farmer gives a plot of land in spring. "I will sow it and reap it and call what happens fate." "You think to stop me?" she said, oddly curious. "You think to tell my dragon not to answer me and my men and my name. And you think to set your own name in a chair for which your father and brother screamed and died." He shook his head. "I don't want." She lifted her hand gently. "This is the last time I will allow you to pretend that your wishes matter. They do not. The world is larger than your wants. It is larger than mine. I am what the world asked out of me. I cannot give that back. My father taught me that if you pass sentence you should swing the sword," he said. His voice cracked like a small branch. "I expected to be the man with his head on the block once. It seemed to me fitting." He reached for the hilt of Longclaw as if the blade needed to feel his hand to tell him what to do. The cave gave the faintest ghost of a reply, a whisper of leather against his glove. Her eyes changed then. Something wild flickered at the edge of them and was gone. She lifted her chin. "You would kill me for what you think I will do, for what you have already done," he said, and his mouth tasted bile. "For what I cannot unsee in you, for what you have promised, for the lives I have sworn in my own heart to protect, because there is no one else who will protect them if we fail." "And if you fail this," she asked, "what will be left of you? Will you still be a man I could have loved?" He wanted to shout that he had loved her, that he loved her even now in this unendurable moment, and that the love did not protect either of them from anything it should have. He swallowed that sound because it would not serve either of them to hear it. "Bend the knee to me, truly," she whispered, as if confiding something to him that she would otherwise be ashamed to say aloud. "Come to me as you once did, and let us make a world together that men will fear and then call good when they have grown used to it. I will be merciful enough for both of us." The cave listened. The sea pressed against its outer wall and retreated, patient as time. Jon felt as if he stood in the courtyard at Winterfell with snow under his boots and the gods watching, and his father at his side with a sword whose weight he had felt in both hands. He knew then that there would be no other time to decide the shape of himself. He saw in some cold corner of his sight the square of the courtyard here where Varys had burned. He saw the city. He saw the shadows of wings crossing a sun. "I am sorry," he said. He drew Longclaw. The sound made something deep in the rock shift, as if the island itself moved. She did not step back. She did not plead. She did not reach for him. She stood as straight as a spear and looked at him as if she wanted to memorize his face for some unknown reason and take it beyond. Outside, Drogon's head moved in the door of the cave like an eclipse. The sound that came from him then was not the killing sound. It was the sound Jon had heard in the night when the dragon slept, the furnace dreaming. His great eye slid close to the gap and stared in at them. Jon saw himself reflected there briefly. Small as a mote, sword in hand, he took 2 careful steps. He had beheaded men in the old way, and he knew how to do it with a single clean stroke. Longclaw's weight was right for it. The angle he understood. He had never believed he would use that knowledge here. Daenerys lifted her chin another fraction as if exposing herself to sunlight. "Do it cleanly," she said. It was not a prayer. It was an instruction. "I will," he said. His body found the motion. Memory and training and horror braided together and made a cord strong enough to pull him through the moment. The blade rose and fell. The sound it made cutting through did not resemble any sound he knew how to name. He did not watch her head fall. He only knew that she had been a tall girl who had stood in front of the world and called herself its mother, and that he had made her small in the space of a breath. And he would never forgive himself for the deed, even as he knew no one else had been coming to do it. The dragon gave a sound that turned the marrow of the bones of the island to water. The cave seemed to draw in. Jon staggered on his knees in blood that had leapt farther than he had thought blood could leap. Daenerys' hair spread like pale seaweed in the puddle. He had known the part where the blade rose and fell. He had not understood the part after as anything but a story men told themselves to carry on. He knelt on stone, and the stone did not forgive. Drogon thrust his head into the cave then. So large Jon could have lain between the 2 ridges above his nostril and slept. The heat was tremendous. The cave went a degree from temperate to desert in almost no time. Jon forced himself to stand, leaving scarlet footprints that looked like someone else's. He lifted Longclaw. He did not know whether to hold it out like an offering or to keep it to kill again with should he somehow be granted time. He ended up with it across his chest like a man who fears arrows. The dragon's eye fixed on him. It was an old eye. It had looked on many small things and decided whether to trouble itself with them or not. Jon had once laid a hand on Rhaegal's neck and felt the muscles there shift like a river. He had once ridden that river. The fact should have made him courageous. It did not. Drogon opened his mouth and made another sound. A keening that struck the inside of Jon's ears so that for a moment he could not hear his own heartbeat. The dragon put his head down and nosed at his mother's hair as delicately as a dog. He moved her with care that belied the size of him and the strength. He lifted her body into the cradle of his jaw with an intelligence that might have been called reverence in men, and then he turned that old eye on Jon again. Jon did not move. He felt the blood cooling on his hands and the damp of the cave rising into him, and some portion of his mind watched itself with an almost scientific interest, noting how men behave when they are about to be burned. Drogon's throat inflated. The fire did not come. The breath ran out again with nothing in it but heat and sound. The dragon stared, and Jon stared back. The exchange lasted so long that his knees shook. Then the beast drew itself back and out, scraping scales along stone and taking the only soft thing in the world with him. When the shadow of his wings had gone from the cave, Jon discovered that he was alive and that he did not want to be. He lowered the sword and only then understood that his hands were shaking so hard he could not have lifted it again in one motion if he had needed to. He sank to a sitting and tasted salt that was his and not the sea's. He did not remember walking back up the path. He remembered the feeling of the wind trying to take all smells from him and failing. He remembered Davos at the top of the steps, the way the old knight's mouth tightened when he saw Jon's face. He remembered men noticing the way men notice a thing that tells them the day has snapped and will not work anymore in its old hinges. He wiped the blade clean himself. He would not give that thing to another pair of hands. When he straightened, Tyrion stood in the shadow of the arch, looking at the sky as if a new star had appeared and he had not decided whether it was a comet or a second moon. "You did it," Tyrion said. His voice was as clean as a man pronouncing a sum. "Of course you did." Jon found there was nothing in him empty enough to give words to that. So he said nothing. "What will you tell them?" Tyrion asked after a moment. "What name will you use for this thing? I may help you choose one that will taste less like ash in the months to come." Davos's hand was a steady weight on Jon's shoulder. "There's only one word for it in the north," the Onion Knight said. He passed sentence and he swung the sword. "I've no other to give it." Tyrion's eyes closed. "So, execution, then. The more letters a word uses, the more comfortable men are with it." He opened his eyes again and looked past Jon. "Where is she?" "Gone," Jon said, and the word had as little meaning as anything had ever had. "He took her." "Drogon." Tyrion nodded once as if the answer had been inevitable. "Good. Better he take her into the clouds than we have to decide what to do with a body that 100,000 men would have wanted to fight over even after they had tired of her alive." "There will be blood for this," Davos said. "Unsullied blood. Northman blood. Advisor blood. If a body can use a title these days." Grey Worm stood in the arch's mouth behind Tyrion like a decision that had been postponed and now would not wait any longer. He took in the three of them the way a general measures the arrow stocks before a battle. The men behind him moved in that unified lineal grace that had made 1,000 men together feel like one man wearing 1,000 suits of skin. "You murdered the queen," he said to Jon. His common tongue was concrete, mortar, hard and almost without grammar. It made the sentence dull and unbearable. I saw you go with her. I do not see her return." "I executed her," Jon said. The word was already making its small home in his mouth. "She intended to. I do not need your war." "Yes," Grey Worm said. "I know what I am. I know what she was. You do not make yourself clean by telling me what she would do. Your sword is not clean because your mouth is." He stepped forward. 2 spears came up, their points precise and almost tender as they approached Jon's belly. Davos moved before he knew he intended to. Tyrion did a strange thing with his body, placing himself neither in front of Jon nor out of the line, but off to the side where he could be hurt if the first thrusts were wild and spared if they were exact. Some instinct for surviving a court had taught him to find a place that made all men hesitate out of simple confusion. Jon did not raise his hands, not yet. If he put them on Longclaw, it would be to do a thing he was not sure he could finish. He kept them at his sides and looked at Grey Worm. "She was going to burn them all," he said softly. "I would have died sooner than allow it." "I would have died sooner than allow many things," Grey Worm said. His eyes were not dead, but they had decided on a dead man's manner. "But I did not allow them because she said not to die yet." There was a cry then from somewhere above and to their left, a sound like a girl's warning that became quickly something else. A wind struck the courtyard as if a new weather had come. Dust took to the air. Men squinted. The shadow that crossed them was a moving mountain. Drogon came down to the inner yard with less delicacy this time and a force that drove a crack through one of the shallow pools and sent water running like a wound. He laid Daenerys out on the flags with a care so precise it made the men watching feel as if their hearts had been touched by a physician's thumb. Her hair spread. Her eyes had closed because there was nothing left in them to look. The blood that had dried on her dress looked like some pattern woven there in a country that had never existed. For a long time, none of them moved. The dragon lifted his head and watched the men, in particular the man who had lifted a sword. He lowered his head until his breath stirred the fine hairs along Jon's wrists. The Unsullied had not been trained for this. They had been trained to die, and to kill, and to endure, and to keep the line. They had not been trained to stand with spears half-raised while the body of a patroness was set down on domestic stone and the creature that could turn them all to smoke waited, thinking. Grey Worm moved first. He went to the edge of the circle and then into it, and he stopped 2 paces from Daenerys' small body. The lines around his mouth softened for a moment. His face broke its discipline and remembered. He looked up at Drogon without fear and without asking for anything. She did not want to be touched by anyone but me, he said, and the words did not sound like boast or claim, except the children she freed. He looked at Jon again. Do not talk to me, he said in the tone of a man telling the fire to keep to its hearth. Do not speak a single word. He knelt, and with those famous perfect hands, the ones that had so impressed masters that they had made 1,000 in their image, he straightened the collar of her dress and smoothed the hair away from her face. He took from his belt a small token a girl had worn, a strand of braided string with a bead in it, and laid it in her hair. Then he stood and stepped away, and drew his spear up again. If any man had drawn steel, then the courtyard would have become a butcher's drawing. None did. Tyrion's face had gone slack with grief he could not be seen to feel. Davos looked at the ground because there was no place else to look. Drogon lifted his head again with a slow grace that would be impossible in any creature but one possessed of too much muscle and a great patience. He looked at the Iron Throne that was not there. The castle had nothing of that shape. It had only this table of maps and these walls. He looked back at Jon and then at the men with spears and then at the sky. The decision that ran through him then was visible as it went. It rolled from jaw to spine to wing in a ripple. Not human thought, not even animal, and yet something that disciplined realities the way gravity does. He put one foreclaw under Daenerys as if picking up the lid of a kettle you do not wish to spill. He raised her again. He reached for her head with a gentleness that gave some men tears whether they had wanted them or not. He gathered her in and then with a sweeps of wings that knocked men to their knees, he went into the sky. His heat was like a truth left behind. The silence afterward could have been a living thing. When noise finally came back into the world, it came in little mouthfuls. The sound of a man closing his fist on nothing and opening it again. The whisper of leather. Someone vomiting dryly in a corner and apologizing to no one. Tyrion wiping his nose with the back of his hand. Davos saying a word that was an apology without letting anyone hear. The clink of a spear point as it tapped stone without meaning. Grey Worm lowered his spear. He could not kill a man in front of all of these witnesses with a dragon having just departed, carrying a queen, because in all the drills they had ever run there had not been such a circumstance. He was not trained to decide a brand new thing when the book had no page for it. He took 2 steps back and made a gesture with his left hand. The Unsullied moved as one in the direction of the armory, not because they intended to put away their weapons, but because they intended to be somewhere that had walls at their backs and doors they could control. Tyrion exhaled. He had not realized he had been holding his breath like a silly boy. "We are alive," he said in wonderment, which was also a complaint. "And now we must decide what to do with being alive." Davos's face showed each ear separately for a blink and then became the old mask again, habitable and practical. "I'll go find the captains before someone else do." "Oh yes," he said. "The Dothraki will want blood. Best to give them meat and words, both, until we have more than a courtyard to stand in." He nodded to Jon and then to Tyrion. "Don't let the words men tell themselves about this get too far away before you've got your hands on them, else they'll come back with teeth." He went, a methodical departure. Tyrion stood with Jon and made no effort to move. "He will try to kill you," he said mildly, watching the place where Grey Worm had vanished. "He will have trouble if the dragon returns, surely, as long as there are men who think your breath is needed in some sense they can stand to think about. But he will try, and he may not need to succeed to make our lives unpleasant." Jon stared at the place where Daenerys had been laid. It looked like any stone now except that he knew what it had held. He found that he could not look long at the blood that had dried there because it gave the lie to words like justice and necessity and wordless duty. He forced himself to look anyway, as if to refuse his own gaze would be to save some small part of himself from a debt he did not want to owe. "You are a king now, if you'd like to be," Tyrion said with a ghastly attempt at lightness that tasted of copper. "It is not the sort you dreamed of, I suppose. Men will say another thing. Kinslayer. It is a word that carries. Better than any other, it sticks. I don't want," Jon began and then stopped, because there were too many things he did not want and they would crowd the air. He did not want to be alive. He did not want to have done what he had done. He did not want to be the man who had to do what came next because of what he had already done. He settled for, "I don't know what I want." Tyrion nodded as if this were an answer he had expected to receive and understood thoroughly. "The realm will decide for you, as it always does when a man cannot decide for himself. A gift in its way, one less choice to muddy the water. We must go to the table." He put his hand out and touched Jon's sleeve lightly, careful as if he might try to move a stag that had been spooked. "I do not know if I will still be alive tomorrow. I do not say that to be dramatic, but because I have betrayed too many people in the service of too many things that were not entirely true. When men like Grey Worm want to make the world simple, they make their list of names small. I would prefer to not be on today's list, or if I must be, to at least choose what I do beforehand." "Come." Jon went. It felt like treason to leave the place where he had killed her and where the blood lay and where the air still remembered her shape. But Davos had been right about words and teeth. At the painted table, the wood still housed the shapes of the countries, as if those shapes had slept there and were now waking. Men were arriving as if pulled by rope attached to their belts. Some faces were gray with shock. Others were locked in the expression of men who would not admit shock had visited them in case it took hard enough to return. Davos came back with 3 captains from the remnant of the fleet, salt glistening on their oiled beards, and a northern sergeant with a face that looked like it had been bitten out of granite, and the tall man from the Vale with the measured contempt of falconers, and a Dothraki KO who had taken command of all that remained of the horse and saw opportunity where other men saw grief. "What is this?" the man from the Vale asked calmly, as if taking the temperature of a sick horse. "I hear one thing and then 10. They cannot all be true. Who is dead and who intends to make me die beside him before I've had my breakfast?" Tyrion put both hands on the table and leaned into them. "The queen is dead," he said. "Executed," and he threw Jon a glance, "by Lord Jon Snow of Winterfell for crimes and more crimes averted. Drogon carried her body off over the sea. Grey Worm will kill you if you speak too loudly about this in the wrong place at the wrong time. Other than that, the morning is like any other." "You mean Aegon Targaryen?" the sergeant from the north said with a bluntness that marked him for a man who had overheard something he could not unhear. "We have letters come from somewhere telling us he is what he is. Is that you?" he demanded of Jon with the loyal stubbornness that only grows in the cold. "Are you that man? If you are you also my lord still?" Jon had never wished for the cold so hard in all his life as he did in that moment. The fog outside did not suffice to make the breath come honest. "I am Jon Snow," he said to the sergeant. "That is what I have been." "And what you are now," Tyrion murmured. "That is what I am now," Jon said. He could hardly hear himself. "What matters is not my name, but whether there is a king in King's Landing who dares to starve my people and put heads on spikes and drown the world in wine while the rest of us bleed." He looked at the map where the city sat like a spider in its web. "Cersei has had the mercy her enemies would not give her. She has her walls and her privy council and her sellswords. She will not surrender because she thinks surrender is a word that will bite her if she tries even to say it." He swallowed. "We will come to her. We will come without burning what we claim we want to rule." The Dothraki KO laughed softly and laid his hand on his arak. His smile was like a cut. He said something in his own tongue that was not entirely friendly. Davos glanced to Tyrion for the translation. Tyrion raised a hand wearily. "He says a city is a horse you must break if you want it to carry you. He prefers to break them with the flat end of his blade." "We ride where we cannot," Davos said patiently to the KO. "We'll need the horsemen to keep the roads for supply. Else we'll starve against the walls, and be very fine enemies for the crows to look down upon. Let them be useful out on the roads, Tyrion said urbanely, picking up Davos' strategy and folding it into his tone as if he had invented it. We will need men to break the Ironborn as well. Euron's fleet swims between here and the city like snakes. He will be smug. It is his default state of mind. Euron Greyjoy will not be at his leisure for long, the Vale man said coolly. I did not bring my hawks down from the eyrie to see them sit on their perches. My archers can make any man touching a tiller choose religion. But I will not bend knee to any Targaryen while the North refuses it. The North will decide for itself, Davos said in a tone that contained more of the North than his birth had granted him. He looked at Jon sidelong. And sooner than we'd like. The sergeant shifted. Lady Sansa will have a word to say about all of this. Tyrion, Jon said, and he put enough iron in the syllables to turn the heads of those who loved iron. You know the gates. You know the words that have leverage in that city. You will write letters. He could taste bile again. He had seen the last letter written by a man of words and what had become of him. It made the command feel like a betrayal. He said it anyway. Offer the men inside bread and safety if they open the smaller posterns when the time comes. We won't sack. We won't rape. We won't burn. We'll keep order better than their own captains do. Tell them I'll hang anyone who breaks that promise. Make sure they believe you. Tyrion's mouth made a little movement as if he had bitten it on the inside without meaning to. He gave Jon a long look with something in it almost like a bow. I can do that, he said. Then, very softly, where only Jon and Davos could hear, I will do it in your name, or the one you prefer. In mine, Jon said. The Northman nodded once, gruff and approving and sad for him in the same motion. I think my lady will not spit at that, at least not in front of the men. And you'll write to your sister, Tyrion said to Jon, carefully. There are truths in it she has a right to, and others that will only make the web more sticky. If I were you, I would tell her everything so that, later, she cannot imply you hid a thing. She has a particular talent for finding dust in a room that has only just been swept. Jon had to smile because the picture of Sansa with a broom in some impossible throne room showed itself in his mind, and the wanting of her opinion in that moment felt like a merciful cut to the heart. And what of the Unsullied? The Vale Lord asked. If the queen is dead and the dragon gone off to do whatever dragons do when there are no palaces left for them to lean on, then that leaves one more army that does not know whether it is still being paid. I would like some clarity at my back as well as at my front. They were not paid, Tyrion said with a spark of old contempt he had not entirely suffocated. They were liberated. They traded once, coin for a thing no coin can buy. He glanced toward the passage where Grey Worm had gone. And then they traded it back for discipline. They will not ask for wage. They will ask for purpose. Whoever gives it to them first will be their master. Keep that in mind when you go about deciding the purpose of your day. Grey Worm won't follow me, Jon said. Probably not, Tyrion agreed. But he may allow you to walk until he can put the skin of his rage somewhere safe and later hold a sword with hands that do not shake. Men like him dislike the feel of shaking. It reminds them of being human. The Iron Fleet. Davos broke in as if to not allow any of them to think too long about grief. I can hurt it if we do not mind borrowing some tricks from the men we despise. Men who donkey quick with boats in the mud of the shallows. Men who take iron hooks to a ship and drag it into a channel so narrow that you would not believe the sea had such a narrow passage in her. If I've taught any boys anything, they'll have it ready this afternoon. We'll pick a day when the wind is stubborn and Euron has a hangover. Tyrion's mouth actually turned upward. It looked strange and welcome there for a heartbeat. Good. Do that. And we'll feed the city with our promise and their fear of each other while we starve their will. The Golden Company knows its trade too well to die for poetry. Give them numbers and an easy exit and they'll flow away like men always do when they're told they may choose the side of the door they prefer. Cersei, the Vale Lord said. His mouth made that name with calculation and a private dread that had nothing to do with words and everything to do with memory. Does the plan extend to her? Tyrion's eyes clouded as if he had looked into a glass and been shown something he had tried not to carry on the surface. She will not come quietly, he said. She believes men are sacks of meat that sit on chairs and that chairs are gods. She will fight while her last finder of poisons draws breath. But perhaps he let the word hang as if he were ashamed to be caught hoping. Perhaps we can make an end with fewer heads thrown from the walls than the last time there was a siege. John laid his palm flat on the map where the city lay. He felt the grain of the wood, the little ridges the carver's knife had left in the sea. He remembered being a boy with a carved wolf in his pocket and the sound of his father's voice saying words like honor and mercy, as if they were shapes in the winter air you could hold if you were willing to let your hands go numb. "We go as soon as Davos is ready," he said, "before the city eats itself, before Euron grows too pleased with himself to keep his mind on the wind, and before Grey Worm decides that killing me will make any part of this easier." "Good," Tyrion said. He pushed back from the table and his chair made the small rude sound a chair makes in a room where men are pretending to be more important than they are. "I will go and find parchment and honesty. Few things more difficult to lay hands on in a castle than Os two in the same room. They broke like the ends of rope cut with a knife. Each man went to his separate task with that grim industriousness men have when they know the thing they do now is going to take their mind off something worse for a few hours. Jon would have stood there and watched them go forever, but Davos did that gentle thing of his, laying a hand on Jon's arm and drawing him along as if he were a skiff in a current. "Come," he said softly. "A mouthful of food, my lord, if you can stand it. Enough to remind your body it's a body. Then you can go be a legend for the afternoon." They made a meal that a hungry dog would have turned its nose at. Bread that had lost yesterday's softness. Fish that had learned too long from the smoke. Apples with bruises that had gone brown. Jon put things in his mouth and made his jaw move and felt nothing good about the business. At one point he had to leave the table because he felt the need to be ill and did not want anyone to see. Davos pretended not to notice. Tyrion sent a boy with a folded scrap addressed not in ink but in the small pricks he made with his knife along the edge. A code to himself that meant, "I have told them something and I am not proud of either the telling or the something." Jon broke it and scanned the marks inside. He did not recognize his own name anywhere, and yet it was all about him. He folded it again and set it on the table and stared at the grain. Hours moved with that unnatural stretch that sometimes afflicts afternoons when winter is coming and a man knows there is evening, and then night, and then morning again, all with work to be done. Men buckled on armor and laughed too loud. Davos's men walked along the jetty lines and made notes in their heads about where the tide would be and when. Tyrion's scribe dipped and lifted his quill so many times his shoulder cramped. A second boy massaged it when he thought no one watched. A raven came in and rattled the air with its ugly softness. It dropped a tube onto the cloth by Jon's hand as if tired of playing its part. Jon slid the cord loose and pulled out the letter. He recognized the hand immediately and then had to hold the thing in his fist for several heartbeats before he could open it because something in him had become afraid of all the words in the world. It was not long. Sansa did not waste herself on flourishes. She asked him if he was still alive and said that if he was, he would not be much longer if he persisted in being a man of the sort he had always been. She told him she had received ravens naming him what he was. She told him she had burned one and kept another and sent a third to a man who could be trusted not to speak of it until she asked him two and a fourth to a woman who would probably use it against them in a year and a blessing under a year if she could contrive it. She told him that if he wanted the North to endure, he would not ask it to kneel again. It had only just learned to stand. She told him she loved him in words that had iron bent into them. She told him to live whether or not he could manage to forgive himself later for the living. She signed it with her name and a little flourish that was not courtly but was hers and had come from somewhere that had nothing to do with men and everything to do with the fact of her. He kept the letter in his hand until the grain of the parchment made an impression on his palm. He put it away inside his shirt because he wanted it close even if it burned him, because pain was an honest guard against the other pain. By evening, when the fog had risen into cloud instead of laying on the sea, men began to make questions of him with their eyes instead of their mouths. They wanted to know if he would speak of what he had done in a way that made it all right to stand near him and call him Lord. He stood on the step of one of the smaller halls where it could be called public without being the kind of public that draws riots. And he spoke in the plainest language he could make. "I pass sentence," he said. I swung the sword. I did it because a city would have burned otherwise. I did it because I believed it would keep some of you alive. I will not tell you it was easy, and I will not tell you I do not bleed." He lifted his hands, and the blood had been washed from them, and yet it was there for any man with a memory to see. "We go now to King's Landing. We will take the city as men, not beasts. If any of you burn or rape or steal, I will hang you with my own rope, no matter what name or rank you claim to cover yourself. If you do not wish to fight under that law, go now. I will not like you less for being honest about what sort of man you are." No man moved. They were the kind of men who move only in the face of something very specific coming at them with teeth. They were not prepared for a command that asked them to tell themselves what they were. Tyrion watched him, and something moved in the dwarf's face like respect and fear crossing paths. The Dothraki, those that had survived snow and darkness and surprise, shook their hair and laughed and leaned on the columns as if they had come in from a storm and found the house too warm to be entirely pleasant. The Unsullied did not attend. Grey Worm kept them to their lines and their drills and their private grief. Drogon did not return. The sky remained only sky, and into it he had taken the girl on whom a dozen world shapes had hung. Night fell without color. The torches along the walls made swords of light out of darkness and then tired in the wind. Jon lay down for a little time because Davos put a hand on his shoulder and told him he had to. He fell asleep with a speed that felt like a betrayal of the day, and he woke with a worse taste in his mouth. In the second hour before dawn, they embarked. The ships went out of the harbor like a line of bones thrown by a sullen god. Davos stood with his jaw set and his eyes half-lidded, seeing things in his mind off. Men did not know how to picture where a current would pass from one side of a gully to the other like a pig turned on the spit, where a man who had lived with the sea in his ears long enough could heard the shift in the pitch and say, "There." The Northmen stood grim and quiet along the rails and looked at the city they were sailing toward as if it were a winter hill with wolves in the brush. The horsemen grumbled at the deck's small, unfamiliar manners. Grey Worm put his men in that posture of waiting that is itself like an attack. Tyrion stood beside Jon and adjusted his cloak so that it sat correctly over his damaged shoulder. "Today we teach a city," he said. "It is an ungrateful student." Jon did not answer. He watched the walls come out of the fog like a new island rising. On the towers the scorpions crouched like insects with too many legs. The Golden Company filed itself into a shape before the gate, as if it were a dinner they meant to carve for exhibition before they ate it. The Red Keep balanced itself on its hill like a promise. They came within bowshot. A silence fell even on the horsemen as the city's face stared back. 1,000 small faces made a larger face of windows and rooftops and crenels and crenellations. The bells hung up there in the air in the places where captains' hands could reach them and make them speak. And men looked up at them as if they might be persuaded to say the right thing by the right man at the right moment. That was always the lie of bells. Davos gave a signal with his hand that was also a prayer. Small boats took off from the far end of their line like ducks startled. They ran low in the water without banners and with men whose faces sailors knew and others did not, and who had names that would not survive this morning. The Iron Fleet slid into place along the channels like knives laid out beside a haunch. On the walls the city's men steadied their bolts and narrowed their eyes. Tyrion put his hand on Jon's arm and then took it away again, unsure if he had the right. "Whatever you are," Tyrion said without looking away from the walls. "For this morning, be that." Jon nodded once. He lifted his hand as if the air had a bridle in it and he could gather it. "Steady," he called, and his voice carried in a way that his father's had once carried and that he had never tried to imitate and now had to rely upon. "Hold, hold, Davos." The old knight's arm went up and down like a man rowing in place. The boats angled, watched the tide make its sly gambits, found the channels men had guessed at in the dark by the change in the voices of the waves. The Ironborn laughed. It was their habit. And then the first of the hidden obstacles Davos's boys had sunk at moonrise took the flank of Euron's prize like a knife under the arm, and the laugh went out of that ship and out of 3 more in quick succession. Men ran. In the walls, captains called the wrong orders and then the right, and then it was too late to recover the first mistake. Sails filled and cracked like banners struck. On the far side, a little gate near the muddy way opened a hand's breadth, and then 2 hands' breadths, and then closed again. frightened of its own courage. Tyrion's letters had found at least one soft place to push. Above, in the shadow of a tower, a small figure slid a cord. A bell made a sound like a throat cleared to speak. It would be the work of an hour to describe the first 15 heartbeats of a battle, and a man who survived them would not remember any of the important parts except that a boy fell in a way that made a sound he would hear later in his sleep. Jon drew breath. He drew Longclaw. He did not think of the cave. He did not think of the girl with blood in her hair. He thought of doors and of the promise he had made men the night before. He thought of what his father had named a man and decided to be that, if only for the space of the next 10 paces. "Forward," he said. "Forward." He stepped off the ship into a boat and into a city that waited with its irreducible number of conspiracies. Cooks with knives, boys with stones, mothers with desperate inventories of bread. Into a day that would not forgive but might, in the balance, add up to something less terrible than the other day they had avoided. The oars bit water. The hull slid in. Somewhere behind them, in a sky nobody had eyes for just then, a shadow crossed the dawn in the shape of a decision that had been made already and would have to be lived with afterward by all who had been alive to see it, and by many more who had not.